Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I see a bunch of people here streaming in. We're just going to give everybody 1 or 2 minutes to join here, and then we'll get started. Thank you for being with us today. All right, I see some more people joining. Thanks for filtering in. We're just going to give people about one more minute to join here, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. We'll let people come in, but we'll kick it off now. Thank you for joining the webinar today with Sense, building the modern candidate experience. We have a lot of really exciting topics today on the AI. We're going to really try to keep it practical and focused on things that you can do today or very soon with Sense to build a great candidate experience using AI. Before we get going here, once again, thank you for taking time today to join us. There is a Q&A function in your Zoom. If you see it on the little toolbar, please feel free to ask questions. We love to get them. I can't be sure that we'll get to all of them today, but we will follow up with you. So I definitely get your question in, and that'll let us know, to reach back out, and we can answer some live also. So the agenda today, as I mentioned earlier, is really hoping to have a practical walkthrough of Sense and Sense AI, and really towards what can you do with AI now, or like I said, in the very near future. There's also a lot of cool things coming up, I think, that will be possible in the coming years, but we really wanted to keep this, hey, like, how can this change your business today, and how can you make a great candidate experience? So we'll be talking about 5 areas here: personalizing the candidate experience, providing a better application process, communicating quickly, the engaging candidates, and while you're doing all this, reducing bias. I'm excited. My name is Alex. I'm one of the co-founders of Sense, for those who I don't know yet, and I run the product team here. Really excited to be joined by my colleague Mithun, who is a director of product management. Mithun, if you can say hi.
Hello, everybody. Excited to be here today.
Awesome. And Mithun works on a lot of areas at Sense that we'll be talking about today. So he is a great resource to be here. So a little bit about Sense, just background for those of you who don't know. We are the leading talent engagement platform. You're powering your end-to-end talent experience. We are really operating at scale now. We've been in business since 2016, working with over 1,000 live customers now, more than 75,000 recruiters on the platform on a daily basis, and working with and talking to about 250 million candidates now per year. And kind of as we approach this topic today, and kind of what we're going to talk about, we kind of ran a survey. We looked at some of our data and Sense that we gather on the platform, and kind of use this to kind of drive, okay, how can we save recruiters time, and kind of give them more time to kind of build a good candidate experience. So this is sort of what we came up with, sort of the ways that recruiters are sort of spending their time today for some things like, calibration, job posting and sourcing, screening, the offer and the onboard management process, co- coordinating schedules for interviews, and then just kind of general cat herding and process management. So this is sort of the way that kind of often our North Star is, kind of using these tools that we'll talk about today. Just like how can we reduce time spent on these to automate her process. And then there's a lot, as we said, since it's been putting a lot into the AI in recruiting. So these are some categories that we're have built and are building for today. Things like that you'll see today, from writing JDs all the way down to chatbots and the engagement. And we're excited to walk through some of these today. So for our first area, I'll pass it over to you. That's it.
Thanks, Alex. One of the key things we think we can do better, and what you'll probably see as a consumer of AI in the coming days and years is going to be hyper personalization. Personalization and customization has been around for a bit, right? And if you're using Spotify, like it knows exactly what you're listening to and it queues up the next song, even if you don't select the next one. But that kind of personalization, it's very hard to achieve in the past. But with the latest breed of technologies and putting our domain knowledge on top of that, right, we're starting to deliver this sort of like personalization at every possible level. Right? What you have in front of you that you're seeing on the slide is the personalization that we are planning to offer to recruiters, that you can easily find candidates for any given role. So if I'm a recruiter, I'm hiring for a role, right? I don't actually have to go look through every application that has come in or only look at the first 10 or 20 applications, but rather use sort of the technology to parse through the candidate profile, parse through the job description, even if that came from the VMS, to match for, find candidates at a deeper level instead of just like, eyeballing a bunch of resumes and picking up candidates. Right. With this sort of technology, we are able to, parse and like understand resumes in multiple languages, and also to be able to, build a taxonomy of skills for a lot of commonly seen industries that we usually deal with. So personalization goes beyond just personalizing for candidate, but now we can start to personalize for a recruiter, for a role. If you want to go to the next slide, Alex, we can talk about like personalizing for pools of candidates, right? If we have the information on the candidates that we have parsed through, that we understand, and have built a map, a graph for, we can then organize these candidates into talent pools where you could just say, okay, give me all these people that are senior pharmacists, or give me people that are, that have previously been a warehouse worker and are currently looking for a job. So you can build these talent pools. And from there, you can either use them manually or you can automate it with the Engage Automation Suite to automatically reach out to these candidates and bring in candidates that are actively looking and interested for in a particular job, or just like if you're looking for holiday hiring, you can go out to all these candidates and see who's actually available for a new job. So personalization goes beyond candidate experience and personalizing the the candidate flow, but also you can now start to personalize the experience that your recruiters will have, your internal employees would have, and if you're a staffing company, your customers would have. So when you have data that you've pulled in a little bit at a deeper level from the resume or from any other interaction that you've had with the candidate, like for example, chatbot conversation, you can now parse through and understand the data and like use that data to drive key decisions. You're no longer limited by just the information that the candidate is provided in the application or that your recruiter is collected on a screening call, but you can get access to that granular information that you can then use to parse through at a detailed level and make decisions using that data. Please. What I want to talk about next is the application process. We've all heard stories about like candidates complaining about like uploading a resume and then having to fill up that same information into an application form. And then sometimes they'll have to create an account with whatever your career site product is, then going on to apply. And if they have to do that multiple times for multiple jobs in any given day, a lot of times you're not attracting or you're not helping the best candidates apply for a job. So that's an area of focus for us where we think we can apply AI to significantly improve the likelihood of someone applying for a job and making it easier for them to apply for a job. The first thing we have launched on that front is our Instant Apply, right? This is available today. And what we have clubbed this with our Discover product, which is essentially a job matching product. Like for every open job, we can find candidates, which is what we talked about in the personalization section. And for every candidate that comes in, we can find jobs. We can present jobs, and we will, expect our customers to build the sort of experience in their hiring flow where matching, in our opinion, should be like oxygen. Everywhere a candidate or a recruiter turns, they should be able to find and get recommended jobs or candidates. So in this flow, you could essentially source a candidate, show them matching jobs, and have them apply for that job in the same conversation. Or if you would prefer for them to be kicked out onto your career site where they can apply, you can do that too. But if you follow through the application process in the same conversation, then you'll have the chance to follow up with candidates if they abandon the application. And also you can collect partial information, like in an application form where you have to fill up the entire form to submit. We can bring that partial information back to you so you can use that partial information to follow up with candidates that you think are promising. Live chat. This is a favorite feature. I know this is not strictly AI, but there is a lot of AI that is built into it. Again, hyper personalization, making life easier for the people that are working in this process, like be it candidate, be it recruiter. If a good story for us is a candidate comes in for sourcing, right? You're using an AI chatbot to engage with that candidate. Once the candidate expresses interest, you show them a list of matches to say, here's a list of jobs that we think you'd be a great fit for. The candidate applies for that job or reviews the job description and expresses interest in the job. You take the application in the conversation using Instant Apply, and you screen that candidate in the same conversation where you can ask them like, are you authorized to work in the US? Can you go to this location? Anything else that is specifically related to that job or job category. And once they pass the screening, you can ship them over to a person, a recruiter that is waiting to have them talk to the candidate. There, our AI can summarize the entire conversation that happened before that point and give you a sentiment on like, okay, this candidate was like, has a positive sentiment, and give you a summary of everything that happened up to that point so that your recruiters have like a warm handoff they can pick up and run with that candidate. And soon you'll be able to interview that candidate using video conferencing tool of your choosing and get that candidate over the screening hurdle. Screening interview, in a single conversation without having to wait, days or weeks to get the first interview on the books. Right? the personalization and the application process can get us to today. In addition to being able to be focused on the candidate experience and getting the candidate, reducing your essentially time to hire, there are some top of the line things that we can help you with that would pay a lot of dividends down the line, right? A simple one is generating job descriptions, right? Like Alex said earlier, I work on a handful of products here at Sense. All of them have something to do with AI. And one of the things that is a bit hard for us to do is to index these jobs and be able to search on jobs. And now most of the time, over 90% of the time, when we are not able to index a job or when we feel that the confidence of predicting the job as a match comes from job descriptions that are not that great, right? This is often because it is pulled from a VMS or it's like a third party and those job descriptions haven't been improved upon. So what we started to think about is how can we help our customers write really good job descriptions, even for jobs that they didn't create the job description for. That way, you start at the top of the process and maximize the chances of finding really good candidates and having this job be recommended to candidates that are coming in. So this is something we have, and you can use this today, is to be able to write job descriptions. And of course, this is not, you have complete control. You could use this to write a job description and edit it whichever shape or form you feel like, and then copy it and post it. Job matches for candidates. I touched on this briefly. This, like I said, should be like oxygen. We recommend our customers build candidate experiences that are, that kind of like always nurture candidates towards an application, right? In a way where, for example, if you have a candidate that you're screening, and the candidate ends up not being a match for the job, right? Instead of saying, oops, you're not a good match, good luck, we recommend that our customers use our job matching capabilities to recommend jobs that the candidate might be better suited for, right? This is a silver medalist workflow that we recommend, right? If a candidate in the staffing sense, right, Russ, our customer service VP, talks about how, the number of applications is proportional to the number of placements, right? If you get a candidate to apply for a job, you can say, thank you for the application. Here are some more jobs we think you might be a good fit for, right? Let's see if you're interested in any of these. So you increase the chance of finding placements for those candidates. Job matching, we recommend should be part of, every flow that you have with the candidate. If you're reaching out to, if you're having a reactivation workflow with the customer or with the candidate, with candidates to, see if they are actively looking, instead of just reaching out to them and asking, are you looking for a job? You should have an AI powered job matching delivered to those candidates to say, here are some jobs that we think you'll be a good fit for based on the information we have for you. Are you interested in any of these jobs? If you think this is not a good match for you, talk to us and give us more information so we can find better matches. So you increase the likelihood of the candidate engaging with you, but also give them a way to engage back with you through a chatbot or any other means to give you more recent information that you can bring back, then reach out meaningfully with some additional jobs, right? So I can't insist enough, like job matching, like although it sounds like it's old technology, it's definitely come a long way using the latest breed of tools. And we should absolutely be making use of it to try and deliver this wherever possible. And the additional bit of good news is if you're a chatbot customer, you're already using our chatbot, you have matching attached to it. So you should already have access to it. It's not something that you have to buy. Next slide, please. Producing candidate resumes. This is something that I am very passionate about. We've heard from customers that especially do a lot of like industrial recruiting where, recruiters go out of their way to create resumes for candidates. But what we feel is we could have recruiters collect this information and create a resume, but also in future offer this as a self-service tool to candidates where they can talk to a chatbot, respond to a bunch of questions, and get a resume in return that they can then use with you, our customer, to apply for jobs, right? These resumes, you could keep them, and the candidates, it's also a service to them. So this is something that we are very passionate about in improving our candidates' lives. That is already available in a form for recruiters to use. So we highly recommend that your recruiters and you give it a try and give us feedback and your thoughts. We'd love to hear more on this topic. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Mithun. Going over here into prompt communications, how do we get back to candidates and re-engage them really fast, with these tools? So there are a couple areas that are really key that, you can do in Sense Now. So one is, developing screening questions. So we're all used to getting a new job that we need to work on, a new rec that's very high priority from a hiring manager. It's not necessarily one that maybe we or the team member has worked on yet. So you can use Sense. This is a model really trained on the many jobs we've seen, the many chats we've seen. You can use that to really get to re-screen questions, for really a wide variety of even niche jobs. And this can be helpful for all kinds of jobs, but I really find it particularly helpful with technical jobs, and I'm talking with people about Sense. If I'm like on a panel and it's a new technology that I've not worked with yet, this can really help me get up to speed. You can then also use these to really put right into your chatbot also. So if you kind of see what we've been talking about so far today, talking about, getting that JD, making these cool questions based on the JD right to a chatbot that's talking to candidates. And, continuing with, we've really thought about some practical ways that we can, kind of help people to write and rewrite content. So another area is around, writing text. And this is one that we've really seen tremendous adoption of so far. And, I find this, again, particularly helpful with rewriting text. So you can see here that we have these like quick enhancement areas. And with, SMS, this is particularly helpful because, you want to write something that's kind of tight, it's short, it's punchy, it's to the point, and, you kind of want to not fall into kind of common traps that, might make that text not get delivered. So this is really just like a one button click in Sense. Again, to help all of us who aren't the best at writing, kind of write the right things to candidates faster. And another area that we have is always around, kind of how can we be bi-directional with candidates? So, we talked a bit about the chatbot and that pre-screening and passing it on to a live recruiter when you need to. But we also want to make sure that that our company is able to respond to candidates in the answers that they might want, really fast, either when they're browsing the site at night when no one is there, or just sort of going through the application process, and want to get that one key thing answered before they move through with the application. This can be huge for increasing your application conversion rate. Which again, I'm often surprised with the data I see. It might just be a tiny thing that a candidate wants to know that they can't find on the site because it's not there or it's tough to find, or they don't want to take the time to kind of talk to someone to just learn more about what the process will be, you know, what are the company benefits. So, you know, we can step in with the chatbot, you know, it's, you know, all trained on your company documentation, and we can get them those answers. And then kind of just like a quick view on sort of what we're doing in the background here on these FAQ questions. So we've really put a lot of time into, you know, again, really training this model for a recruitment specific use case. You know, and then because obviously our models are really prompted to only answer based on the information that you give it and not give a generic answer that, you know, at the best case won't be helpful, but at the worst case, you know, could actually be wrong and give that candidate, you know, bad info. So we put a lot into this. You know, you can kind of see it live on some of the bots that are out, but you can just see here, like this is a real comparison that we did with some data, you know, based on, hey, if you ask something to a generic model like a Chat GPT or to the Sense, you know, custom model, you know, you can see here that you're getting much more kind of, you know, actionable and targeted feedback. And another example here, you know, we have some bots actually that folks use even after post hire. You know, and if someone's asking, hey, I got into an accident at work, you know, this is for a trucking job. You know, it's really key that obviously you give good response there. So moving on, you know, we've now talked about getting back to candidates fast and now into kind of the whole candidate engagement realm. So, you know, again, we can use AI throughout Sense. It's not only in the texting messaging area to write good messages. You know, within Sense Engage, we have AI working there also to write messages. You know, again, if you're writing something more like longer form content, marketing copy, this is something you can do right in Sense Engage and not have to use these sort of, you know, publicly available tools that you don't necessarily know where your data is going. And you know, all of this is really coming together, you know, as we think about all the pieces that we talked about today, into, you know, sort of how do we find these candidates in the database that you have with that job match functionality, reach out to them when a job comes in and kind of put them through that screening and scheduling, you know, process. So we think this is one of the best ways to save time now with, you know, with AI and candidate engagement, is to go, you know, as fast as possible from that, you know, job being opened up to a personalized message to the right candidates. And then going into, you know, kind of how do we use the data that we're gathering back. So that's actually something that we just, you know, released in Sense, is, you know, all the data that you're gathering from candidates, you know, in the surveys that you run, you know, now we'll summarize this for you and just sort of, you know, what that feedback means, you know, what the general categories are that you're getting. You know, that can be both from candidates or on the staffing side from your kind of customers also. You know, again, there are definitely, you know, companies on Sense are getting so many of these responses, it can actually be hard to really sift through. So this can be really helpful. And again, with kind of going back into the chatbot and pulling together everything that we're doing here that we've talked about, we kind of the kind of top area right now for engagement that we're seeing people save time on and also give the candidates, the better experience that they want is this kind of core screening and scheduling experience. Again, there are lots of times of the day when a recruiter is not there to talk to someone. A candidate, can't talk on the phone, or they're not ready to yet, and we don't want to lose those candidates. Scheduling is really key. We know how complex this can be at your company. It's not just a single interview Calendly type link. We're doing things now like coordinating panels. If you have to have multiple people talking to a candidate based on the time and the process that they're at. We're doing things like coordinating sequentials. So if you have a slate of folks that are going to talk to candidates, they have to talk to this person first, and then that person, and then based on the outcome, this third person, you can build that in sense too. So again, kind of taking off as much of that coordination time, which can be really painful to candidates. Also, if they're getting like emails and texts from tons of folks, and this interviewer, that recruiter, that hiring manager, again, really streamlining that communication into one place. So as our final area, and I'll pass this back to Mifune, we know that a lot of these tools are exciting. They have a lot of promise and a lot of results, but we do want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that reduces bias, and we want to kind of talk about some of the work that we've done there.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on bias, but I think it's an important topic, and it is one that comes up often. So I want to take some time, talk about bias, and help you understand the implications. But before I get started, I just want to call out disclosure. I'm not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. So anything that we are talking about here is our point of view and recommendations. Individual customers, we highly recommend you talk to your counsel about the implications of all these new laws and different jurisdictions and how it impacts you and how you need to work through them. Clearly, this is a big topic. Using bias and AI bias is a hot topic in a lot of places. If you've heard of the New York law, Local Law 144, it's first of its kind, at least in the US, that is trying to govern the use of what they're calling AEDDs. It's essentially anything that is used to make a decision either on an application or a promotion. Right? If those tools are being used there, then it is subject to the law. The law is a little bit unclear on who it applies to, but generally it is stated that anybody that's operating in New York, could mean that if you're based in New York or if you're hiring in New York. So in either case, I think customers, we would recommend that you stay on the safe side. And on the sense side, we are actively monitoring and learning about these new things as they come and making sure that our customers are informed. There is a LinkedIn article posted a couple of days ago. You can take a look at it that goes into detail about this. But essentially, if you boil this down, humans have biases, right? We all have bias, either conscious or unconscious. And when we make decisions and then use those decisions to train our AI, right, those biases can be built into our models, right? Avoiding bias, preventing bias, right, in my experience working with AI is not a thing, right? We have to consciously come up with a plan to reduce bias and monitor for it. And that's what we are doing here. And that's what we recommend and offer to customers that are using our AI products, right? Most of you have heard of the 4/5 rule. I know it's not like a real rule that's on paper, but general, guideline that the EEOC provides, where if a particular population, if they are less than 80% of their impact ratio, they could be called into question as a bias. Right. So what the New York law essentially tries to do is identify the impact ratio for intersectional populations, right? Where there is a statistically significant sample size. So if you only had, say, 5 Asian people apply for a job and that was out of 1,000, that is not statistically significant. So the impact ratio, that's why you see these blanks in here. But otherwise, for the populations, we need to make sure that the selection rate of candidates and the impact ratio resulting from that selection rate is over 0.8. Right. So we recently went through this through a bias audit through an independent third-party auditor. Our auditor is Holistic AI. And the New York law allows for 2 kinds of audits to be done. You as a customer, you are the responsible party for this audit, where you can do this audit through a company like through an auditor like Holistic AI, and post these results on your site and in the application process where you notify the candidates. Or we as a service provider can do a tool audit where, as long as your data is part of the audit, you could be covered under it. So we've done the first round of audit for a handful of customers, and we've shared those results with them. But we are going through another process to collect data to be able to support an audit. The emails will go out, and if you're interested, please respond to those surveys and get us your data. The main blocker here being most customers don't traditionally haven't sent us the gender and ethnicity data because we don't use it, we don't need it, but for this audit we do. So if you get that data and you're actually using one of our AI tools to make employment decisions, then we can support you there. And if you are not using us and you have another AEDT, then we highly recommend that you read through our LinkedIn post and our article, and you get yourself a auditor and some sort of follow the process to put in the notifications there. And in addition to New York, there are multiple other jurisdictions that are actively considering or working on legislation to govern the use of AI, especially in employment. New Jersey is working on one. California, there are 3 different agencies trying to do exactly the same thing, but we don't know who is going to actually get this out the door. But in any case, I'm sure they'll have one. European Union has published one already. So there is a lot of interest in this space. And, we are constantly monitoring and working on to keep ourselves on top of this topic, but also help our customers navigate the various legislation and jurisdictional enforcement actions. So what you're seeing here in front of you is the candidate matching bias report. This is essentially a tool audit. So if you sign up for our candidate matching solution, either as part of CRM or outside of CRM, then you would be covered for duration when this audit certificate is valid. So if you start using the tool today, you don't need to go get an audit done tomorrow, but rather you will have that 1-year period or if you start immediately. But if you start 6 months into the audit cycle, then you have 6 months. At the end of that, when you go for an audit again, at that point, we'll have to use your data to show that there is no bias. Your data won't be published anywhere. We will only use sort of the aggregated data just to see, if there was any bias that was observed. Next slide, please. The next slide is our, Sense Chatbot results, and this is a much more established product. We've had this product in the market for a while now. We have a lot of data, so you can see, the numbers are much more closer to 1, which is what we want to see, where this is real data, and as you can observe, for the populations that have statistically significant number of applicants, the bias is almost non-existent, right? And this is also a place where automation and AI can help, because these numbers are usually not observed in the process that in a human run process. Doesn't mean that AI is better, but it just doesn't really have those biases built in, or it just like goes through every applicant, not the applicants that applied first. Right. So these are two things. If you go to the next slide, we can talk about some just sort of high level, process. This is going to continue to be a topic, right, more so in the coming days, because there is a mad rush to build a lot of AI tools, right? But there is sort of this kind of gold rush. Obviously, we have to pay close attention to make sure that there is, everything that we're building is fair. So, we highly recommend that customers come up with some sort of like, governance and risk management and maintain compliance, and also demand that of their vendors, right? And if it is us, like, it is a good time to ask what sort of governance the service providers have, companies have built, and what sort of, auditors do they have? How are they auditing for, bias, and how are they auditing for, like, data handling, right? These are frameworks that we can provide thought leadership on and help our customers, think about. And like I said, we highly recommend that customers come up with this sort of framework and think about them actively, because it's only going to be more and more of a thing as we move along in this sort of evolution of AI that is so rapidly. The last thing, as I alluded to earlier, is legislation is coming up pretty much everywhere where we can think of it. There is a sizable population of candidates. So it is important to stay on top of it, understand them, and react to them. And we're also trying to build some sort of like a holistic view of this audit, so that way, our customers, we can help them in any way possible. So that's everything I wanted to cover on the bias. Alex, did you want to add anything to this topic? I know it's on top of all of our minds.
Thanks, Mithun. Yeah, I mean, just kind of to wrap it on this, like, I would say that this is definitely something that should be on people's minds, and we're happy to help here. Again, we can advise based on what we're seeing in the industry and what we know of these, to kind of give you the right data to kind of make your own decisions. But this, will continue to be something that we really focus on and kind of, build sense with a bias avoidance first mindset, and we look forward to collaborating on that together. So we can give you some of your time back today. Thank you all for joining and for staying. The recording will be shared. This is our contacts also down at the bottom here. We always love to get notes and to talk more about this stuff. So thank you once again, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.